Nobody's really asked this question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. So, Acer Aspire E15 or Dell Latitude E7450 for cheap gaming laptop of older games, mainly? I don't know. Let's get into it and we'll find out. So here we have the Acer Aspire E15 that I've been using as my daily laptop. The model number will be up here because, heaven forbid, I'm not going to try to remember that on video. This machine is powered by an Intel Core i5-6200U CPU, 8 gigs of DDR4, albeit just a single 8 gig stick. That's what it had when it was new, so single channel memory is what this machine currently has. It shipped new with a 1 terabyte hard drive, but I have swapped it for a 240 gig solid state drive. Of not particularly the most highest end of quality, but it's still a better drive than the mechanical drive that was in this machine prior. And for its graphics and display, as you can see, it's got a 1080p LCD across 15 inches, and it has both the Intel HD Graphics 520 as well as this GeForce 940 MX discrete graphics card with 2 gigs of GDDR5 graphics memory. Albeit though, the clock speeds are rather low, but we'll get into that here in a minute. So there's that. So as I mentioned, this is the Dell Latitude E7450. This one is a fairly high-end configuration featuring the Core i7-5600U CPU. It originally shipped with 8 gigs of DDR3L, but it has 16 gigs of DDR3L in it currently, which is maxed out, I believe. And again, this one has a solid-state drive of about 240 gigabytes in capacity, which is not too bad. Albeit this one is on mSATA versus this one's just traditional SATA. Although, to be fair, this one does have an M.2 slot in it, if I'm not mistaken. So this one would also have the performance advantage if I were to install that over this computer. So this thing does have a bit of an SSD advantage over the other. But I digress. This machine also has dual GPUs, in the form of the integrated Intel HD Graphics 5500, as well as the discrete NVIDIA GeForce 840M with 2 gigs of DDR3 video memory. So there's a distinct difference. This also has a 1080p IPS LCD, whereas I don't think this one's IPS, it's just a VA panel, or it looks very similar to that of an IPS panel, but the contrast is definitely not the same. Definitely the Dell, while being smaller, has the higher quality LCD. So taking a brief look at the GPU inside of the Acer Aspire, this uses the GeForce 940 MX, which uses 2 gigs of GDDR5 graphics memory. It has a 795 megahertz graphics clock and a 5 gigabit per second memory data rate, which is all good and all, but that clock speed is probably going to be the Achilles heel of this laptop, despite having the 512 CUDA cores. We'll find out once we get into the benchmarks, but you can definitely see the memory bandwidth is very respectable for a machine like this with a 940 MX, which is still a fairly entry-level GPU for a laptop such as this. Moving over to the Dell, this is where things don't get nearly as interesting, but it could be at the same time. This has 384 CUDA cores on its GeForce 840M, but as you'll notice, it has a higher graphics clock of 1029 megahertz, but its memory data rate is only 1.8 gigabits per second on a 64-bit memory bus with the 2 gigs of DDR3 video memory it has, for a total memory bandwidth of 14.4 gigabytes per second, comparative to this machine, which also has a 64-bit memory interface, which that gives both of these, by the way, but this one has a significantly larger memory bandwidth of 40.08 gigabytes per second. So while the memory is faster on the Acer, the graphics clock on the Dell is higher. So who's to say who's going to perform better? It might vary title to title. And then one more thing that's worth actually noting here. This one uses only a ×4 width bus on a Generation 2 PCI Express lane, or whatever. So it only uses 4 PCI Express lanes for the GPU on a Generation 2 bus. So I'm not sure what the theoretical throughput of that would be, but I'm sure someone will chime in below in the comments. Whereas this machine also uses 4 PCI Express lanes, but it's on Generation 3. So the bandwidth, in theory, would be better on this machine comparative to the Dell. But again, only the time will tell based on, the benchmarks and all that fun stuff. So I didn't test the newest of games because obviously lack of SSD space for one thing, and two, it probably wouldn't run too well. So I picked a few different choice titles that I would probably play on either of these laptops. They're older games, some of which are online multiplayer, some of which are early access. So I've picked a couple of differentiating games just so I could keep things at least a little bit interesting. So Grand Theft Auto 4 was recently updated to the Complete Edition, so I wanted to test its performance as far as either of these laptops are concerned. So that's why you see the Rockstar Launcher shortcut on the desktop there. There's also The Long Dark, which is a survivalist-based game, which can be quite beautiful and taxing on hardware. It is pretty decently optimized for NVIDIA GPUs. There's Distance, which is, I believe, an early access title. It might not be, but it's still one that also pushes NVIDIA GPUs quite hard. Then there's also Left 4 Dead 2, which is an online competitive multiplayer game of sorts, even to this day. Then there is A Hat in Time, which just flat out likes to push hardware to its absolute limit, and it certainly did with these two machines, there's no doubt about that. And then Grid Autosport, which is a 2013 racing game, if I'm not mistaken. It came out in 2013. Might have been earlier, might have been later, I can't recall exactly, but I believe it was around 2013. So it's an older game, but it is well optimized, as many Codemasters titles are. And so I ran the benchmark title on that on both these laptops to get an idea as to how each one would play. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the results. Most of the screen recording that you're about to see was performed on the Acer Aspire, although there are at least, I think, one or two clips that I may have recorded on the Dell for the sake of comparison purposes throughout this video, so you might notice them. I'll point them out where applicable. A Hat in Time first at 1366 by 768 resolution with the performance preset, which is in between balanced and high performance, a low setting if you will. Both laptops played the game quite well, with the Acer slightly pulling ahead of the Dell in the average FPS department across 3 different missions, with 72.5 FPS versus 52 FPS even, making my best attempts not to log loading screens to represent a more realistic set of 1% and 0.1% lows. Interestingly, while the Dell doesn't get nearly as high of an average, which makes sense given its older graphics card, the stronger CPU pulls ahead as far as reducing the stutter, which you can see in its 1% and 0.1% low results of 19.36 and 7.83 FPS respectively, compared to 12.37 and 5.54 FPS on the Acer's results. It could also be because the Dell has dual-channel RAM, which can help it in events like this, so as to say how the Acer would perform with the same test if it had 16 gigs of DDR4. Though it's not to say that either machine wasn't without its fair share of stutter, because this game absolutely stutters very, very badly. In fact, I think it actually stutters worse than that of Grand Theft Auto 4, and that actually says a lot for Grand Theft Auto 4, but it just seems like this game, I don't know what it is about it, but it just has a very high and unoptimized CPU usage, which just causes a bunch of stuttering to occur at random, so you better expect that if you are going to be playing this game on PC. Distance next, again at 1366 by 768 resolution with a mixed settings list, but mostly medium settings otherwise, with all advanced lighting and effects off. The Dell scored an average of 49.4 FPS across the first 4 story missions, and its benchmarking is a little less accurate since I accounted for the loading screens, hence the 0.7 FPS on the 0.1% low figure. But even still, the stuttering was not too bad, accounting for the nearly 30 FPS 1% low. The Acer, on the other hand, scores an average of 67.9 FPS with the same settings and tests, and I skipped the loading screens here, which gives a more accurate representation of 1% and 0.1% lows, which even on this weaker CPU are not bad at all. Grid Autosport's benchmark test is next. Both were tested with 720p with the medium preset with no anti-aliasing, just to keep consistency. This is a curveball, as the Dell pulls ahead not only in the average, even by just 1 frame per second at 76 compared to 75, but its 1% and 0.1% figures are more consistent too, resulting in less stutter. A lot less stutter. Overall, I have to hand it to the Dell for this test. I didn't test gameplay for now due to time constraints in testing, but take my word for these results. I'm sure gameplay would probably suffer more on the Dell due to its gimped memory throughput compared to the Acer, especially at higher resolutions or maybe playing online. But who's to say? We don't know. The next game I was convinced was going to run bad on both laptops, and that is The Long Dark. This game I have found to be rather demanding on your components, particularly NVIDIA laptop GPUs in this case. At 720p with the game's lowest preset of low, I trekked into the first story episode of this Canadian apocalyptic winter mainland to try and recover from a plane crash, and as expected, neither machine was brilliant here. Though once again, the Dell pulls ahead with an average of 48.3 FPS compared to the Acer with its 33.4% FPS average. And also, again, the Dell continues to have less stutter than the Acer too. I'm beginning to wonder if there's some anomaly with the Acer, or maybe the memory bandwidth in my config is hurting performance badly. I almost want to say I think there is an error with benchmarking on the Acer, so I might retest this in the future, and maybe I'll update in the either the description or a comment with the updated results. Golf with Your Friends was recently updated with a new map called Volcano, and some additional optimizations to maps like Worms, which used to be the most intensive map in the game, but now seems to have taken some suggestions from me for optimization and reducing stutter. Starting with the new Volcano records, both were tested at 1080p with the low in-game preset. The Acer annoyingly seems to not be utilized here and got awful frame rates all around, scoring 49.3 FPS average with pretty meh 1% and 0.1% figures of 26 and 18.5 FPS respectively. Not sure what happened here, but they need to fix this so it uses more than like 60% of the GPU. Because as you can see in this recording from the Dell, even while screen recording, it wiped the floor of the Acer and actually had full GPU utilization, it seemed like, scoring 79 FPS on average on this hot new map. Ha, see what I did there? But I don't know. Maybe driver updates or a game update will correct this, but I'll consider this an unfair result in the meantime because that's not cool. On the Worms map, though, the Dell pulled ahead of the Acer, both with full GPU utilization this time, thank God. The Dell got an average of 104.3 FPS with pretty good 1% and 0.1% figures, while the Acer got 90, rounded up from 89.7. Though it definitely had more stutter here with 44.6 FPS and 14 for its 1% and 0.1% respective figures. Grand Theft Auto 4, the Complete Edition, is one that I was anxious to test, just to see if it is still the same unoptimized mess it has been for its lifetime. And while it has gotten better throughout the years, even before the Complete Edition update, it also hasn't changed in some ways, like the stutter. At 1366 by 768 with all the settings at medium, including the shadows, which was probably a bad idea admittedly, because low would have cured some of the issues I had in testing. Once again, the Dell somehow gets a better score here with 50.6 FPS on average across the opening cutscene and first two Roman missions, scoring over the Acer's 43.4% FPS on average. And again, the better CPU resulted in less stutter in this case. I'm beginning to wonder if there was an anomaly in testing with the Acer or if Grand Theft Auto 4 is just that unoptimized. I wouldn't doubt it. Let me know if I should retest and maybe include reboots on both for attempts in consistency. Last game, Left 4 Dead 2, tested with the highest in-game settings at 1080p with no anti-aliasing again, and the Acer finally can reclaim a bit of better average FPS for itself across two single-player story missions, claiming an average of 85.7 FPS over the Dell, which got an 80 on average. But an added curveball, the Dell got less stutter once again thanks to its better CPU, with the Acer getting a little more stutter, more often when the game saved automatically or effects like the boomer occurred on screen. Either way, both machines are absolutely able to play this classic game. And even online if you still do that sort of stuff. So at the end of the day, which one would I pick over the other? And that's kind of a tough question, one that I really don't have a concrete answer for, and one that's actually pretty debatable, honestly. So on one hand, we have on the Acer side of things, it has a newer graphics chip with faster and better video memory. It's based on a newer architecture on both the CPU and the GPU side of things, so it is going to get driver support for longer. It is more efficient, and admittedly, yeah, the build isn't nearly as nice. The LCD isn't nearly as nice. It is still overall a decent laptop for most things you'd like to do. And I did mention this, I believe, has an M.2 slot for an SSD, so this will have faster SSD storage options comparative to the Dell. Not to say that this one isn't fast, but this one would be faster as it'd be PCI Express based, not SATA based like that one would be. But that's just digressions, really, honestly. And even though, admittedly, yeah, this one has a potato webcam, it at least has one over this thing, which, yeah, this one wasn't optioned with a webcam when it was new, but I believe it probably would have been just as bad as this one. So, I mean, I don't know, pick your poison on the webcam side of things. And this one doesn't have the backlit keyboard. These Acers were optional with a backlit keyboard, but this one doesn't have it, so, you know, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world, really. So, yeah. And it has an option for an optical drive if I really wanted to put one in here, whereas the Dell, you can't. So that's another leg up on the Acer. And of course, it's newer because it's got DDR4 RAM versus DDR3L in the case of the Latitude. It's got USB-C, it's got a better touchpad, and overall, yeah, again, the machine is just newer, and it's going to get better support over a longer span of time. So that's just something that this Acer has going for it. Whereas on the Dell side of things, yes, in some cases it did do better because either the dual channel memory it's currently got in the case of these tests, which did better than the Acer, and the stronger CPU probably helped it in some cases. And really, I don't think the DDR3 video memory of this machine is actually giving it as badly as I thought, comparative to initial impressions. So it actually seems to sometimes outperform the 940MX in the Acer, but I think, again, it's probably down to some of the things that this thing is lacking comparative to this thing hardware-wise, which makes it somewhat of an unfair comparison, but still a fair comparison to make nonetheless because, you know, these two machines as is, which one's better than the other? And admittedly, given the mixed test results that I've seen, it's really hard to know which one would for sure be better than the other. So, yes, for CPU-heavy titles, this one would probably be better because it actually has a better benchmarking score and it will run better, but who's to say that the graphics are going to be any better? Well, we don't really know, honestly. And then, of course, on the case of this thing, this one, you could upgrade the memory, upgrade the SSD. You could try to see if you could get a, you know, better set of memory speeds out of it if you were to upgrade it, that sort of stuff. Because I think this has 2133 megahertz RAM. I could be wrong on that. Anyways, doesn't matter for the sake of this video. So, anyways, nitpicking and all that rambling aside, which one would I pick? It's really kind of a tough call, honestly. But admittedly, I think at the end of the day, I would probably go for the Acer in my book, just because it's got the newer architectures for both the CPU and the GPU. It's got DDR4 RAM, which is faster than DDR3, and especially if you get dual channel, which is actually possible. You can upgrade the RAM on this. I think it's got 2 RAM slots, so you can upgrade the RAM on this for dual channel memory, and it's more efficient, so it has better battery life, that sort of stuff. I mean, it's a little harder to replace the battery on this thing, but you can replace it. It is dual, and at the end of the day, it's a bigger laptop with more expansion than this Dell. Not to say that this Dell is bad in any way. It absolutely isn't, and I'm definitely going to be keeping it for sure. And it's got the fingerprint scanner, not really a requirement, but, you know, whatever. But I don't really like this thing's touchpad nearly as much. It's not really that good at tracking my fingers compared to the touchpad on the Acer. And yes, it does have the backlit keyboard, which is nice. It has a better LCD, better sounding speakers, honestly, in my opinion. I think these sound better. It's got better CPU, which is faster. It might not be nearly as efficient, but, you know, it's got a better performing CPU. And it's just a smaller laptop, which could be a little bit easier as far as the portability is concerned. But anyways, my decision-making and opinion-making stuff aside, what would you pick if you had to choose between one of these laptops as far as your older gaming laptop, if you wanted to pick one? Or what would you suggest, or what would you have for a laptop doing these kinds of games or whatever have you? Let me know down below in the comments, because I'd actually be kind of curious to hear your thoughts. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, well, there's a button that looks like this. You can click it. It lets me know that you liked the video, and that's really awesome of you. Of course, the other button works as well if you didn't like the video. And if you'd like to see more content just like this one in the near future, there's a button down below that says subscribe. You should probably click on it. That would really help me out, and I would really appreciate that. So, yep, with all that out of the way, once again, thank you all for watching. Catch you all in the next video. Alright guys, so a bit of an addendum to this video, one that I wasn't planning on actually making, but I guess I'm making it now. So, in my testing and in like editing, I noticed that the figures for frame rate on the Acer were awfully low in the long dark. And one thing I thought was wrong was the resolution was wrong, despite the game saying it was actually in 720p. And this isn't the first time that I've ran into this issue. You see, in the menu, the display options, they mention one thing. Aha! See, I didn't change that. See, when I booted this game up initially, it said 1280 by 720 there. But in fact, it was actually running in 1080p the whole time. So for 1080p on this laptop, okay, fine. That actually didn't run half bad for 1080p. I'm actually really impressed. But that's not what I was testing for. So let's see if we can actually bring this back down to 1280 by 720, and let's see if the frame rate increases. Yeah, it definitely increased, not by a significant margin, but it went to 30. And so, yeah, that looks like 720p. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and retest this. I'm going to put it in some gameplay, and I will come back with the metrics of how this game runs at actual 720p resolution, and we'll do a recomparison of this game versus the Dell, and we'll see if it's any better or if it's, well, just as bad. So, jump cut. I will be right back. All right, so forgive me with the audio quality on this. I'm not bringing out my good mic for this one because it's the addendum section, so forgive me. But anyways, you all saw, and you can also see in the screen recording, that's continued footage of the long dark with the 1080p resolution from the Acer, how it's not doing too great. I mean, it's playable, sure, but it's not brilliant. But testing at 720p, it actually improved the average frame rate figures quite a bit, including some of the stutter going away as well. Well, not perfect, because it still stutters when it saves and vice versa, but it's way better. So the average with the 720p resolution was actually 45 frames per second exactly, with a 1% low of 21.8 and a 0.1% low of 3.4, basically. You can just round it up. So, yes, it is really actually better suited for 720p than 1080p, obviously. So, I don't know how I managed to let that slip through the cracks, but forgive me, that's what you should be using as a reference. This game is most definitely playable on this hardware, but probably don't want to go any higher than either 1366 by 768 or 1280 by 720. Anyways, that's actually it for this video, so, well, I'll see you all in the next one.